This is an ABP Live Podcast.
Welcome to Cracking Conversations. I am Niharika Nanda, and in this podcast, we talk to people, share experiences, and crack meaningful conversations. Today, we live in a world जहाँ पर startups are becoming the next big thing. Every other person or every second, third person that we talk to, या तो वो एक startup entrepreneur होते हैं या फिर they're planning to start their own startup. But how do you get the process right? I mean, after all, you are just a new entrepreneur. To help you in that, we have the perfect book, Startup Compass, How Iconic Entrepreneurs Got It Right by Ujwal Kalra and Shobhit Shubhankar, both of whom are from IIM Ahmedabad. This is a very interesting book because this is not a book that gives out gyan. It clearly lays out the steps that you need to follow in order to make your startup and to make it successful. And you know what? They have insights from some of the biggest entrepreneurs from across the country. From Kunal Shah from Cred, Sahil Barua from Delivery, Sachin Bansal from Flipkart, Deep Kalra from Make My Trip, and these are just a few names. There is a full list of contributors who have contributed into this book, who have interviewed for this book, and उन्हीं से बात करके इस book को लिखा गया है. So without further ado, let's welcome on Cracking Conversations Ujwal Kalra and Shobhit Shubhankar, the authors of Startup Compass, How Iconic Entrepreneurs Got It Right. Hi Ujwal, hi Shobhit. How are you guys doing? What's up?
Hi Niharika. Firstly, thank you so much for the time today. It's been crazy of late, particularly with the book release coming and a lot of congratulations coming in at personal level. But more so, the best part has been, and Shobhit I think would agree to that, is that a lot of positive response coming in for the book. From the perspective that good tangible learnings across the 10 steps of the life cycle of startup coming from the behemoths and icons of the Indian startup space.
How about you, Shobhit?
Hey Niharika, good to be speaking to you. Really excited to share more about the book, more about the journey of writing this book. But yeah, all good otherwise, and look forward to having this conversation.
Same here. So you guys have collaborated and co-authored an amazing book by the name of Startup Compass, How Iconic Entrepreneurs Got It Right. Where did the idea of writing this book came from?
Basically, it all started back at IIM Ahmedabad. So at IIM, when we were thinking of our startup idea, we did not know how to proceed, right? How to think of idea, how to build product, how to form a team, raise money. While sure, there are a lot of YouTube videos out there which gives you nuggets of wisdom here and there, and there are a lot of pieces out there wherein top icons or entrepreneurs talk about their story, but there was no amalgamation of very pointed insights at each story, at each life cycle of a startup level, talking about this. And that is where it all started, because that was something which we wanted to learn at that point in time. So at IIM Ahmedabad, we started this series, how to start a startup. Honestly, like any startup, it was a startup in itself. We did not know how well people would take that up. But honestly, the response was above and beyond. Both at IIM Ahmedabad level, where we had to, in a lot of the sessions, had to ask people that there's no enough space, so you'll have to go back and really watch it live on YouTube. Right. And thereafter, we put that on YouTube. And of course, the response over there again was amazing. So we did that in 2016 and 17. In 2018, this is January 2018, when I was having a conversation with my dad. There was, during that time, it was a weekend. At that time, in a very casual way, my father said that you have all the content, why don't you write a book? And I also casually said, yeah, sure, it'll be easy. So that's where it all started. And of course, Shobhit and I were together building how to start a startup. I talked to him. He also very casually said, yeah, we can do that. And that's where all of it began. Retrospectively, now you think of it, this is January 2018, 4.5 years back. Never thought the journey and what blood, sweat, sleepless night it takes. But that's like for any beautiful startup, right? You're always optimistic at the start, and you just give in your 100% and make that work. And that was our journey as well.
Very true.
I think the real motivation here, Niharika, was at the start was primarily about figuring out things for ourselves, right?
Right.
When the How to Start a Startup series happened, what we realized was a lot of these insights, a lot of these journeys were really striking a chord with the audience. So often we sort of look at startups and we look at founders from a distance, and it's not always obvious to us what it takes to build a startup, what's the journey exactly like, and what does it really take behind the scenes. And so we sort of, during that lecture series, we realized that a lot of those insights, a lot of those facets were getting uncovered. And then we thought it might actually make sense to go much deeper, a lot deeper, and find out both for ourselves as well as potentially for a wider audience that might read this book, what it really means to build a startup from the start to the end.
We are at this point living in a world where so many people are giving into their own startups and starting their own things. So I think, as you mentioned, that there are YouTube videos and everything that can give you some sort of an insight, but then again, you brought together all of them along with your own experience. So I think that really matters in such situations, because that is what people are looking for, that someone who has done it, if they tell you, to uska zyada impact aata hai, right?
Absolutely. So in fact, let me talk about two. So I was saying that there are primarily two major archetypes of videos or content which is out there very much prevalent.
Okay.
The first archetype is what we call gyan.
Right.
You just search at how to think of idea. There will be 5, 10, 15, 20, however many. Right? But it is at a very theoretical level that these are the 5 steps, these are the 3 things, these are the 7 things.
Exactly.
And the second archetype is more of when people talk about, let's say, talk about their startup journey, which is at a very 30,000 feet view, which is inspiring for sure.
Yeah.
But that inspiration lasts with you as a listener just for a couple of days. There was no amalgamation of these two things, which talks about, let's say, how to think of an idea. This is a structured way. And look, this is how Girish of Freshworks really started his idea, which was riding the wave. And then it gives real stories, real anecdotes, which both inspires you as well as leaves you with tangible learnings.
Exactly.
Yeah. So just to add to this, Niharika, I think sort of the best way to describe these archetypes that Ujwal is alluding to is sort of to call one topical, where you have lots of articles, enough and more videos talking about how to sort of just raise money, or how to focus on sales and marketing, how to drive SEO marketing, etc., right? But it's very sort of focused. It's a short write-up or a short video with somebody trying to tell you gyan or give you gyan on one very specific topic, but that doesn't necessarily link with everything that comes before or comes after. So that is one. Exactly. The other is basically the biographical archetype, right? Where you're sort of, you're told to sort of, or you read about somebody's story, right? You might read of a founder's story and you sort of learn all about them. But that's more about an individual rather than their journey of actually building something from scratch, right? And again, that might be extremely inspiring. And so many of these books that are biographical in nature, they're really, really good reads. But often they might be about one company or one particular individual, which might not necessarily be more generally applicable. So what we try to do with Startup Compass is we really look at bringing together insights across multiple individuals, across multiple stages of a startup, right? And try to amalgamate insights, amalgamate learnings, stories, perspectives into something that's very crisp and very synthesized, and really sort of speaks from multiple perspectives about a particular stage, but also sort of has a beginning and an end, and what comes before and what comes after to it.
That's very important, because we live in an age where people are not into, reading very lengthy amount of text, or as Ujwal mentioned, that thesis. No one is going to go out and actually read a thesis before starting a startup. So you need something that's sort of to the point and that covers pretty much the whole thing. And that's what the idea of Startup Compass was, right?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think more importantly, a thesis might not be very generally applicable, right? In a very sort of specific context, for a specific company, something might have worked. But I think eventually, if you're looking to build something, it's more about how you should be thinking about a particular thing, a particular situation. What is the kind of frameworks that are more broadly applicable,
Right.
that would be more relevant rather
Exactly.
than a super deep dive into one specific topic.
The book says that it covers the steps of creating and working on a startup. So what are these steps that we are looking at?
So we've divided the book into 10 chronological steps. They being the first being, even before you take the plunge, right? You should be
Right.
well aware of what you're getting into. And that has multiple parts to it, right? Understanding why you're doing what you're doing. Understanding that there will be depression, but you need to be disciplined in that depression. Covering that all tales are not fairy tales. So just be prepared, mentally prepared for what you're delving into. Second is how to think of an idea. Observing the customer, observing the patterns across the world, observing the wave, and then validating that idea. The third step is building a team, because having that A+ team is probably the most critical step of all.
Very true.
The fourth is, once you have the idea in place, once you have the team in place, then you need to build that world-class product. The fifth being that you need to launch that product, because what you have built out there in your garages or your dorm room or your home or at your friend's place, while theoretically that might sound very good, but when you hit the market, most often than not, that's
That's
not
a
the
different
case. And the
reality
market teaches
altogether.
you a lot. Absolutely. And the market teaches you a lot.
Yeah.
The sixth step is, once you have some kind of traction, some kind of things going in place, raising money. So how you raise money, bootstrapping versus raising money, looking at VCs, looking at the investors, how they look at you, how they assess you,
Right.
and so on. The seventh step is scaling up. That once you have found that product market fit, once you have the money, which is a fuel for you, how do you scale up that rocket ship? The eighth step is basically setting up for success, because there are a lot of intrinsic looking things, right? Which includes building culture,
Right.
building KPIs, building proper organization,
Finding the right team, and
which are really important once you start scaling up. The
Right.
ninth step is building a behemoth, because let's say you've built $100 million or $200 million company, right? You've had the 0 to 1 journey. Now, how to make you go from the 1 to 100?
200.
After 0 to 1, the 1 to 100, which is building that probably $10 billion, $100 billion, or even a $1 trillion company.
Exactly.
And the last step is the exit, which can happen either you go for an IPO, either the company does not work and you will have to sell out, right? And that leads to the exit. But the last part around that exit is the second innings, because
Right.
not everything is done after the first innings. You come back and bat for the second innings.
Right. Not every end and exit is an exit. Exactly.
Absolutely. Once, So those are the 10 steps.
Okay. Anything that you would like to add, Shobhit?
No, I think those are the 10 steps, and the 10 steps are, they encompass the entire journey of a startup from beginning, from conception, from even before conception, when you're almost sort of thinking about whether you even want to do this or not,
Right.
all the way to an eventual exit. Of course, this journey might differ from one startup to another. Not every startup actually ends up with an exit necessarily. For instance, when we spoke to Ujwal Kalra, what he said was going public, which we sort of identified as one of the avenues for an exit. He said going public is just reaching the base of Mount Everest, and there's still a lot of climbing to do.
Yeah.
So the specific stories of individual startups will vary, but overall, when we looked at the journey of a startup, we thought, yes, these are the 10 steps that we should be writing about, and that's exactly how we sort of built, architected the book.
So you guys interviewed some of the biggest entrepreneurs from India for your book. So how was the experience? Did it feel like being starstruck?
So I think more than being starstruck, I think initially you probably are a little daunted at the prospect of speaking to these founders that you read about or you sort of watch on television. But I think what really struck us both was just how approachable all of these founders were, and just the grace with which they carried themselves. I think that was something that really struck home for both of us. The fact that these really celebrated individuals should want to speak about their journeys and would want to really throw light on what it took for them to build their companies, and speak with such candor, speak with such deep insight about their journeys, the act of building. I think that was something that really sort of struck us. That was fairly sort of moving in many ways.
Yeah, agreed to that point. At the start, Niharika, you're absolutely correct. In fact, so I still remember the first session was taken by Sanjeev Bikhchandani, and in some ways, he's the godfather of the internet age of our country. Right? Padma Bhushan awardee, a billionaire himself. Yeah. So basically, in fact, let me even take a step back. This is when we had thought of that we would do how to start a startup. We had approached Professor Amit Karna, and at that point in time, he's a strategy professor, right? And strategy professors typically, obviously, are really good at strategy, but are also really good at structuring things. And he really forced us to structure into, it has to be a very tangible and digestible kind of a thing. And that is where this 10-step journey really came to be. So it's all because of him, to be very honest. So once we had that structure in place, once we had that these 10 sessions will be there, we were on lookout for the first speaker for the series.
Right.
And for us, it had to start with a big bang, because the first is the make or break. If there is a traction in the first, then we will latch on, and then hopefully it should be a smooth journey. And that is what happened. So at that point in time, we approached Professor Rakesh Basan, who was dean at that point in time. He said that he'll ask Sanjeev Bikhchandani if he can come to the campus for the first session. And I was like, sir, it's up to you. We blown apart if that can happen. And I still remember we had written this mail to Sanjeev, and I was coming back from Udaipur back to Ahmedabad, and I read that mail. My internet was not working. I could see that mail has come, but internet was not working because we were on highway, and my heart was in my mouth whether it's a yes or a no, whether it's a yes or a no. So that ride itself was pretty amazing. But when Sanjeev came, obviously we met, gave my hand, the hand was shaking, and it was definitely a starstruck moment, right? Because these are the people who you admire, whom are actually icons. But the point, as Shobhit was mentioning, so for us, the learning was also, for them, it was to dissipate their learnings for the larger audience, right? And how they can contribute to the society once they have really learned and mastered that skill.
Right. So while interviewing Deep Kalra from Make My Trip, Falguni Nair from Nykaa, Kunal Shah from Free Charge, Cred, all of these iconic entrepreneurs whom you talked to, what were some of the most important things that came out of all of those discussions?
So for me, I think some of the elements that really came out were, at least one of the most interesting elements for me was from Deep's story, where we talked about moments in the journey of Make My Trip when the prospects were a little unclear. So this is back in the early 2000s, when Make My Trip was still a fairly small company, and they were working out of a small office, and they were trying to what the team would basically do is make calls all night long to be able to sell tickets and hotel reservations to folks in the US. So these are basically Indian expats, NRIs in the US who would want to travel to India, and Make My Trip was basically selling tickets and hotel reservations. And there were nights when things weren't going very well, simply because they would not sell enough, and the team would look around and they would look at the rest of the team, the extended team basically, and they would be a little downcast, and the rest of the team would pick up on it and become demoralized. And this went on for a few days, and then the core team, the founding team, they realized that if they were to continue doing this, then the extended team would be demoralized, and it wouldn't really be happy sailing. And so what they decided was they would take it 1 day, 1 month at a time. So they would at the start of the month, they would say that, okay, are we in or are we not? And if they decided to be in, they would continue to just put their heads down and continue working, and not let it show that even if things weren't going so well, they would not let it show. And month after month, they just kept doing this. And at the end of the month, they would convene again and decide whether
Whether
they
they
had
to go ahead or
one
not.
other month inside them or not.
Right.
And so Deep said that this fairly basic exercise, this allowed them to continue going on for many months, and eventually things turned around. Eventually, his company started growing. But he called it discipline and depression, which I thought was a really good way to think about.
To explain the whole idea.
Yeah. So that is definitely something that sort of stood out for me and that has stayed with me. I think the other part that I thought was a little counterintuitive was the fact that many of these founders that we spoke to, Sahil from Delivery, Tarun from Ather, they spoke about how the HR part of the organization is actually super important.
Right, definitely.
Typically, when we think about a startup, we think about the product, right? And our natural inclination is to talk about the product and how is it a good product or a bad product. But apparently, the team that builds the product and the team that allows the company to grow, that is equally, if not more important.
Right.
And whether you sort of build a good team, whether you're able to infuse the right culture, whether you're able to put together a team that works well together or not, that determines whether you end up building a product and a company that scales or not.
Right. And even building a team is one part, but maintaining it is a completely different ballgame altogether. Because as you said, that Deep mentioned that's what they saw, that the team had, their morale was really down. So they won't probably be able to be as productive as they can when they're feeling better. So definitely team plays a very major role in the entire process of the startup.
Yeah, absolutely. The other overarching realization was just when you're doing something whose end game or sort of end point is unknown, it's super important to have the why clear inside your own mind. So you know what really is motivating you, what exactly it is that you want to achieve out of this choice. Because if that is unclear, then when things don't go well for you, you might not know.
And you don't have the reason that why did we start. If that entire idea of why is not clear, then it starts to diminish the whole idea.
Yeah, exactly.
Anything
Ujwal?
that you'd like to add, Ujwal?
One overarching thing which I have observed, in fact, this came to be that so I remember back in BCG, I was talking to a principal of mine, and he said that you've interviewed these 15 of the biggest entrepreneurs of India. What is that one thing which is common among all of these?
Right.
Is it perseverance? Is it some skill set, or what is it? And that actually got me thinking that taking a step back, there is not even a single thing which I would say is common among all of these 15 people. Not even a single thing.
Okay.
But the beauty of it is that all of these 15 people are far and beyond in at least one thing. And that is the common link among all of them.
Okay.
So for example, Deep Kalra, as Shobhit was mentioning the example, from 2001 to 2003, the level of perseverance they had, that is unmatchable.
Right.
Secondly, so Mr. Narayan Murthy has written foreword of the book, and fortunately, we've had the chance to interact with him over the period of time.
Right.
His level of perfectionism is unmatchable.
Exactly.
For example, Kunal Shah, founder of Cred, his level of networking in India, outside or anywhere, is unmatchable. So the point being that there is at least one thing
that they all excel in far and beyond.
Absolutely. And that is their advantage over the rest of the country or the world.
That's such a different thing to even notice amongst a group of such a legendary group of people, that they might not have something in common, but then again, they are experts in their particular fields, and that's pretty much what takes them forward as entrepreneurs in this country and in this world.
Yep.
So in this whole process of writing this book, what was that one thing or maybe that one insight that really stuck with you both?
Similar with me. So in fact, to be very honest, currently I'm also in my entrepreneurial journey.
Okay.
I'm co-founder and CEO of Nakad, which is a supply chain finance company.
Okay.
We recently raised our first seed round of $7 million from Axel Matrix.
Wow, that's amazing.
Thank you. And the good part about writing the book is that you also learn from all of these journeys. right? So for
Right.
instance, I'll give you one example, and the example to which Shobhit had also mentioned, knowing the why you're doing. Why is that so much important? Because there will always be the time when shit hits the roof, and when
Right.
everything will just go away, slither away, and you would think that, what am I even doing? And at that point in time, the why needs to be really clear.
Exactly.
I still remember, so me and my co-founder Sambhav, we were coming back from our first market visit. So we had the idea, we were thinking that this would work. We were not really sure whether this will work or not. But the first market visit, when we were coming back, and that is the time I asked Sambhav, I know for a fact that knowing the why is important. Let's try to figure out that why. And that was a 45-minute conversation when I was driving. We were driving back from Manesar back to Delhi. And that 45-minute conversation will always be etched in my memory on why are we doing. Now, I don't know what the startup will fare. I'm sure it will be a huge thing. I have no questions around that. But I know for a fact that there'll be ups and downs. The why for us, understanding that why, because we are uniquely positioned to solve for the credit-starved nation we are.
Right.
That is the why for us. And come whatever may, we will stick to it. The problem statement might change, the solution might change, but we will stick to our why.
That's very important, because that's the reason why you started. That is the reason behind the whole thing. Now that's actually happening.
Right.
So startups are growing left, right, and center, especially among the young people. So what are some of the tips from you both that you would like to give to this novice, to the novice entrepreneurs? Because you've been entrepreneurs, you've written such an amazing book for them. So what are some of the basic tips that they can definitely follow?
One thing, I'll pick that up, and in fact that came from Sanjeev Bikhchandani, and that's very counterintuitive. The common myth is that startup founders are risk takers. On the contrary, successful startup founders are risk averse. And that was very counterintuitive. And I've actually seen that in my journey or the journeys of my peers, my friends, and so on. While sure, it takes some kind of risk to leave your comfortable job when you're already earning a lot,
Right.
And leave that to those uncharted territories. Yes, it is risk taking, but it's a calculated risk.
Right.
So the point I'm making is that you don't just blindfold and jump into it. You do your research, you understand your customer, you understand the pain point, you see whether that will work or not. Yes, afterwards it's a plunge. But the risk averse nature will always stick, because even after you've taken a plunge, there will always be different routes achieving the next goal and the next goal and the next goal.
Right.
While sure, in the 4-3 times, those risks might work in your favor. But if you just keep on taking those risks, and you take such a big gamble and it doesn't work out, then it's all done and dusted. Right? That's why
Either you have the job or you have a startup, then that's
Yeah.
the end, pretty much.
That's why in successful startup founders, that's again, that risk averse nature is required, so that you keep on finding the path to success with minimal risk.
Right.
So yes, that one's super important. I think the other thing that we realized while writing the book and while speaking to a lot of these founders was something that's potentially underestimated. And this is the people element. The traditional startup narrative is you move fast and break things, and sometimes that narrative seems to suggest that people can be a little disposable.
Right.
What we heard repeatedly was that it's the people that you surround yourself with, that you choose to build your startup with, the relationships that you are able to develop and nurture, that really determine the outcomes for you.
Right.
And this is something that Sanjeev told us about. This is something that Anu Ariyaran told us about. This is something that Raghu emphasized when we were talking about how do you really find a co-founder. And he said, too often in life we focus on the tangible capabilities, and we talk about getting a coder, or we talk about getting someone with X, Y, or Z skills. But it's so much more important to find people that you share values with, because if your values are not compatible, then you will not be able to stand them when they are at their worst, or they will not be able to stand you when you are at your worst. And that might happen so often, and that does happen so often when you're collaborating with someone.
Definitely.
we heard the same thing from Anu when she told us about this founder who would, even before getting an investor to invest in his company, he would go on these long walks with potential investors to be able to sort of build a relationship with them and really sort of connect with them before having them invest in his company.
Right.
Same with Sahil and his set of co-founders. How they knew each other for so many years before they actually decided to start a company together. Or in the case of Yashish, who told us that he would rather, pick people. Who actually told us that he only meets people when he's partly convinced that he wants to hire someone. He meets people when it comes in an interview context.
Yeah.
And he's very careful about who he hires into the company, because getting the wrong person in can really undermine the company in so many ways. So I think that is something that really resonated with us, and that was something that a lot of these founders repeated to us, but something that I think we would not ourselves have really necessarily understood without having been told,
or probably without having a bad experience.
Yeah.
Possibly.
So actually on that, you tend to often take the lazy way out. And in fact, we've seen that happen a lot. You find your co-founder among your friends.
Right.
But that should not be the case.
Right.
In fact, Anu in the book has said that unless you worked with that person in, let's say, your school, college days, in a project, or a colleague, again, working, you get to know that frequency, whether that's matching with the other person or not.
Exactly.
Versus, again, in typically early stage founders, you see that this is my friend, I like this guy, let's start up.
We can do this. Right.
That never works. So friend, sure, there is good vibe as a friend, but you really don't know the way of working.
Right.
And professional
the work ethic should also match.
Absolutely. And in fact, the reason why relationships matter so much, and finding that person, be it investor, be it your co-founder, is so important. In fact, Anu again gave this data point that the longevity of marriage in US is actually lower than the longevity of co-founders and board members on your cap table. Right? So if you give so much of time and thought to figure your life partner, so should the case be with figuring out your...
Right.
Yeah.
Definitely. Those are some very... those are the kind of insights that you actually don't think of, because again, I think the most common co-founders when it comes to startups is pretty much our friends. We don't, or maybe people with a similar skill set. What we forget is the emotional and the work ethic bit of the whole thing, that you need to be connected on an emotional level so that you can understand the other person. And of course, work ethic is the main thing. It goes without saying.
Yeah.
Right. It was such an amazing experience talking to both of you. Thank you so much for joining me in this conversation on Cracking Conversations today on ABP Live Podcast, Shobhit and Ujwal. I hope that you both enjoyed as well.
Absolutely.
Our pleasure, Niharika. Thank you so much for making time to speak to us, and it has been an absolute pleasure to speak to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So guys, you just heard Shobhit and Ujwal talk about their book, talk about the kind of steps that need to be followed in order to make your startup and run it smoothly. And I think such reads are very important. You know why? Because bookish cheezein to hum college mein, school mein seekh lete hain, but things that come out of experience, and especially from experience of such huge names when it comes to startups and entrepreneurs and entrepreneurship in India, I think there is nothing that can match this, isn't it? For more such meaningful conversations, stay tuned to Cracking Conversations only on ABP Live Podcast with me, Niharika Nanda. The sound designing for this episode was delivered by Lalit. For all the latest updates, stay tuned to ABP Live Podcast.
आजादी का अमृत महोत्सव बनेगा मानवता का महोत्सव. Join hands with ABP Network and the Robin Hood Army in our Mission 75. Under this mission, we will serve 75 lakh meals to the needy across the country and transform 75 lives. तो अगर आप जुड़ना चाहेंगे हमारी इस मुहिम के साथ, ड्रॉप कीजिए एक मैसेज ऑन द व्हाट्सएप नंबर 918971966164. Wishing you all a very happy 75th Independence Day.
This is an ABP Live Podcast.